Hello and welcome to the Fitness Without Filter podcast with me, Richard Palfrey. This is the first one we're recording to video and audio. Today I'm speaking to Emilia Thompson, who is a registered nutritionist in the UK. She has a PhD. She is a health coach, educator, public speaker, and a prolific content creator. So hello, Emilia, and please introduce yourself.
That was a great introduction. Hi. That was a great introduction. I don't think I've ever been called a prolific social media creator before, but I quite like it. So yeah, I think you've covered the main things. I am a registered nutritionist and I work predominantly with people who are trying to improve their relationship with food or their relationship with body in some way. And I also run a nutrition education course for personal trainers and coaches called EIQ Nutrition. And I run that with Emma Gordon. And that is an online evidence-based course focused predominantly on compassionate-based, evidence-based nutrition. Quite holistic course, but very, very science heavy, aiming to help personal trainers just provide a better service for their clients. So those are my two main roles at the moment, plus social media content. Obviously.
Cool. So if we jump back a bit then, how did you get to, because we talked before we started recording about where you're at right now with your career and what you've got coming up later this year. How did you get to the point where you're at right now?
Good question. I was very, very academic. So like you mentioned, I have a PhD in exercise physiology, a master's in nutrition, an undergraduate sports biomedicine. And I always wanted to work in elite sport. And so I went to Loughborough, which is like the kind of number one sports place or top three sports place in the UK for studying, and started working and kind of dipping my toe in elite sport whilst I was doing my PhD. And then realised actually this dream that I had of working with performance athletes was not at all what I thought it was, and I didn't want to do it anymore. And at the same time, I started competing in bodybuilding. So I was a bikini athlete for 4.5 years in the UK and found that there was no evidence-based nutrition in bodybuilding in the world of fitness. There was just nothing available. And so I kind of started to write about my own journey, write about some of the science of nutrition as I was going along, extreme diets, bulking, the disordered habits that come with fitness and competing. I started sharing a lot of very, very authentic information and experiences that I had at the same time. As then I got a job in lecturing sport nutrition. And so the two kind of were quite separate for a while. And then I found that a lot of my students were following me on social media and were asking why was I not doing this kind of consultancy outside of lecturing. And that's kind of then how I fell into my niche, which is working with people with disordered habits. And they may well have come from extreme dieting backgrounds, and a lot of them have. And so I fell into my consultancy work, and that kind of escalated quite quickly. So I run a team of coaches now who use my methods. And because of my teaching background and being a teaching fellow, I know that I love doing that. And so I kind of fell into then a lot more of the education and a lot more of the public speaking. So I think that's kind of how.
And that's us up to date.
That's us up to date, I think so.
Okay, so one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you was I came across your social media and that a while ago, and I started to follow it and listen to what you said and read your blogs and everything else. And you're one of the few people, as you said, your openness talks very frankly about a lot of issues that probably only just about now becoming regularly talked about, and it's got a bit less stigma than it used to have. Which is why I was like, okay, when I started sending out emails to people and requests going, would you please talk to me on my podcast? And you very kindly got back to me. So if we're going to jump back and forth a little bit, because I want to talk to you about things you've written and stuff and ask you questions. But right from the start then, if we're talking about eating disorders and disordered eating, in like common parlance, what's the difference?
Good question. Eating disorders have a very specific diagnosis, and they are a clinical mental health disorder or mental illness, and they have quite strict criteria to meet them. So they include things like binge eating disorder, anorexia, bulimia, and there are about 5 or 6 total kind of classified eating disorders. And those require specific medical support through your doctor, usually. It depends which country you're in, etc. That's generally the route that you have to go down. Disordered eating doesn't have such a clear definition. If you think of eating disorders at one end of the spectrum and then a kind of optimal, healthful relationship with food on the other end of the spectrum, disordered eating is kind of somewhere in the middle, and it can range from emotional eating, regularly overeating, and or extreme restriction, all the way up to somebody who actually struggles to eat certain foods because they feel guilty around them, struggles to socialize because they don't want to eat around other people. Things that I think for a long time the fitness industry normalized as kind of a normal way to eat if you have health and fitness goals. A lot of those habits are disordered. And so if your relationship with food in some way is negatively impacting your life, i.e. it's inhibiting your social time, or it's preoccupying your brain so you can't think about work, or you can't be present with people that you're around, then that is a disordered eating habit that generally we would say requires some work.
Mm-hmm. So given the fact that these days there seems to be ever more focus and influence on people's behaviors and choices and habits, is there a massive increase now in disordered eating and eating disorders since you were in your earlier career stages, or has it always been about the same?
It's tough because I think awareness has improved a lot. So if we're looking at statistics, more people are seeking support for eating disorders and disordered eating, more people are vocal about it. And so that alone would increase the kind of prevalence of that because we know about it more. Certainly since 2020, the statistics are telling us that there's been a huge increase in people seeking support for eating disorders and disordered eating. Mm-hmm. And yes, it has increased over the last, say, 10 years since maybe I kind of started in this industry in some way, shape or form. But really in the last couple of years, we've really seen quite a large increase. And I think a lot of that is to do with the impact of lockdowns and obviously the pandemic on everyone's relationship with food and health in general.
Yeah. I mean, that was what I expected you to sort of say, at least reference a pandemic, because that's a point in history which we've never had before, where everyone is forced to massively restrict their life, their occupation, be in one location, not readily be able to exercise. And that's obviously going to have a massive impact. And then you've got the whole impact of emotional eating, which we'll touch on in a minute. So I know that's a big thing we talk about as well. And all those things coming together in recent years, that must have been a colossal factor in all of that.
Yeah, and things like uncertainty and a feeling of a lack of control in the world is a big trigger for some people to find control in their diet in some way, shape, or form. And the economic impact for some people, the financial restraints for some people, not only does that have an impact on people's mental health, but also in their accessibility to food and how that relates to their eating habits. So everyone's food environment changed, so people were around food a lot more and have more access to be able to overeat and emotionally eat. And a lot of people's coping strategies, like you said, exercise was taken away. And for a lot of people who maybe had disordered eating habits in the past, exercise is a really helpful coping strategy to some degree. And when that was taken away, it triggered a lot of people to struggle with their relationship with food. So they're so multifaceted. There were myriad reasons why it was just a bit of a tornado for people's relationships with food at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a shockingly bad combination of restrict physical health and impact emotional mental health, because I was making myself very aware of what was going on in the health and fitness world, even with athletes I know, people like you can see on social media. Eddie Hall was talking about, the impact of having no physical exertion, no activity, no exercise, especially in the UK and other places where you were absolutely banned from doing anything. You couldn't go outside, you couldn't walk, you couldn't go to the gym, everything else. And he made a very good point on Instagram, which I echo to other people, going, right, when it comes to men especially, for a lot of men don't physically express their emotions or deal with their mental health as they should. So for them, exercise is the outlet to go and tax themselves in the gym or to play sport. And you suddenly remove that and put them in a protracted, stressful situation where they have no discernible end date. And it was, I'm sure, causing an awful lot of problems for people, an awful lot of depression and stress and anxiety, which would have then fostered the whole idea of, well, I can't exercise, I'll eat or I'll drink.
Absolutely. And for a lot, like you said, if we are unable to express our emotions or even acknowledge our emotions, we often, like you said, a lot of people use exercise, a lot of people will also use food. Mm-hmm. And there's almost kind of this physical suppression that we get from food. If we feel a certain way that we don't want to feel it, we'll just eat, and it's almost provides this kind of physical, like said, suppression of the feeling or a distraction. And if exercise has gone and we don't have any other coping strategies and food is directly in front of us because we're working in the kitchen, then what do we think is going to happen? That's going to be our first kind of port of call.
Yeah. I mean, I read something you'd written about emotional eating and your explanation of it. And I've said this openly for years. I would class myself as an emotional eater, not all the time, but some of the time. And as you clarified in a very succinct manner, being an emotional eater doesn't mean your go-to for every situation is just food. It means something's going on or something's happening or has happened that you can't control, or there's an issue, and you look to something as a matter of consolation or something you can control. Now, I've done that at times. I don't drink a great deal, so it's not alcohol, but I like to go, right, I'm eating really well as part of my normal routine. Something happens or I'm pissed off, and I go, fuck it. I'm ordering takeout, so I can't be asked going to the kitchen and behaving, or I'm buying this on the way home. And I had this conversation with a friend of mine who's a guy, just to clarify, this guy talking to a guy, and he was like, what do you mean you're an emotional eater? Isn't that a woman's thing? And I was like, shut the fuck up. You can't really believe that. And I explained to him what I meant. He went, oh, yeah, I do that as well. Well, there you go.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And I think some of that is that kind of toxic masculinity thing of, well, emotional eating requires emotions, and we don't talk about emotions, therefore I can't be an emotional eater. And so probably a lot of it is to do with that. But actually, it's really just eating in response to some sort of negative, usually negative mood state to try and regulate our emotions. But you're right, we have to acknowledge that we actually feel those emotions in order to acknowledge that we eat emotionally. Yeah,
exactly. It's an interesting place to be. I think it's a lot more prevalent than people even realize that it has a behavioral cause. You know, people like they'll get upset or hacked off in the script. Where's the ice cream in the freezer? And off they go. Or it's that grasp thing. I've seen it when I used to work in a very high-end gym in a corporate environment. You could literally track by how people's days were going, by how full the cafes were around the area. You know, it's like who's in there buying donuts and coffee, or who's just in and out. You know, it's like, oh, they're having a bad day because they're sat there with 2 muffins or coffee, whereas normally they're in the gym this time of day. You could observe it if you knew what you were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to say that it's okay to emotionally eat. It's fine to emotionally eat, provided it's not your only coping strategy, and provided you are aware really of what you're doing. I will still feel sad sometimes and eat a pizza or have some donuts or whatever the case may be. And sometimes emotionally eating might be involving other people because your family has a comfort food that you all enjoy, and that is absolutely okay. But again, it's the awareness of why you're doing it is important, and recognizing that you might feel sad for 2 weeks, but eating a pizza every day for 2 weeks is probably not going to make you feel better. Maybe on the first day. And then the next day might be going for a walk. And then the next day might be going to the gym, whatever it may be. So it's about having that kind of range of tools aside from just food.
So if anyone's listening to this or watching, because as I said, it's the first time I'm recording the video, hopefully it all works out right and I grasp the handle of the tech I'm using. So if anyone's listened to this and they've already thought of themselves as potentially veering towards or possibly already in a state of disordered eating or an eating disorder, what would be your recommendations on an early sort of stage? If someone goes, I think I'm doing this, or I live like this, what would be your recommendations?
The first thing is, if you think it might even remotely be in the realms of an eating disorder, is to speak to your doctor. That's the most important thing. If anyone comes to me and they say, I'm not sure where I sit, I will always say, speak to your doctor first. That's super crucial. But then the next thing is really identifying what it is that you feel is disordered and starting to become more aware about why that habit may well be present. So a kind of classic example is overeating. That I work a lot with clients around overeating. And it might be that you are somebody who does really well during the week and then overeats at the weekend. And you think, I don't know if that's a normal thing. The thing is socially, we kind of normalize this, restrict during the week, overeat at the weekend. It's almost like, you'll see memes about it, people make jokes about it. And to some degree, having lower calories during the week and higher calories at the weekend is quite a nice way to structure your week if it supports you. the key with any sort of disordered habits really is, again, noticing if it's negatively impacting your life. And if this overeating cycle, for example, is leading to feelings of guilt, leading to feelings of shame and over restriction during the week, then that is something that you want to work on, because at no point should your relationship with food or your habits be causing shame or guilt. And that's a kind of key note to make. So I encourage everyone to write things down, to journal, and to start to get more aware of your habits. So it might be that you journal and say, I actually found that I really overate this weekend, but I know that I was feeling anxious. I was worried about a big meeting I had on Monday. And you can ask yourself questions like, what other strategies do I have in place to support me feeling anxious? I don't have any. Okay, let's add some in there. Or maybe it's because actually, I spent Monday to Friday hungry and fantasizing about that pizza. And then I got up on Friday night and I ate the whole thing beyond fullness. Okay, so next week, maybe if I crave a pizza on a Tuesday, I'm going to allow myself to have it and see what difference that makes on a Friday. And it's about really, the most important thing you can do is get curious about it, rather than thinking I have no self-control or there's something wrong with me or feeling bad. It's about saying, okay, these habits are trying to tell me something. Let's get curious about what that might be. And only then, when we get curious and identify what it's trying to tell us, can we then change the way that we do things.
It's interesting to hear you say, because it's not a common conversation I've had with people in the fitness industry, this being aware of a sense of, why you don't want to be feeling guilty or whatever else, because like you said, the idea of being relatively sensible for what you eat and drink during the week can lead you to go, you know what, I can kick back and relax on the weekend. But we all know that that's really, really quickly merged itself into this whole quote unquote cheat culture, where people think they have to live this brutally bland, miserable week in order to enjoy Friday night or Saturday or whatever else. And that ends up becoming the whole miserable binge drink on a Friday night, eat too much on a Saturday, feel miserable through Sunday, and start the cycle again. And it's something I really try and force into my new PT clients' heads is, right, real world. You are not going to destroy all your success and your efforts in the gym time because you've gone to a friend's wedding and you did have a slice of cake and you had a glass of champagne. So no guilt. Never attach a negative emotional fixation to your eating habits, because that's a road you just fall down. You don't even go down. It's a very, very bad thing to start, but it's so common.
You're completely right. And if we look at any sort of, there are some key contributors just to disordered eating habits, and one of them is dichotomous thinking, like you said, having good or bad foods. And I think most people can say, I don't have good or bad foods, but I only eat pizza on Friday, but I wouldn't ever have a pastry for breakfast on a Wednesday, but I don't allow myself to have the cake that someone brings into work on a Thursday afternoon because it's not the weekend. That's still dichotomous thinking, and we have to really challenge this. And the more you think about good and bad foods, or you have complete foods that you exclude from your diet, the more likely you are to have overeating episodes and a lot of guilt and shame around it. And you're completely right. When I started competing, it was very much, it went from cheat day, I think. I remember somebody that I used to follow when I started competing, and she said, you can eat whatever you want between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. on a Saturday night. And so it was insane. And at this point, so keep in mind, at this point, I think I had my PhD, or I was pretty much at the end of it. I had a master's in nutrition, and I thought, well, if this is what all the bodybuilders do, I want to be a bodybuilder. Maybe it's different for bodybuilders than it is for performance athletes. Maybe I should. And it's ludicrous to think back on it, but when you're so ingrained in the culture of fitness and you're so bombarded with these types of messages all the time, it's very difficult to know who to look to for advice, what advice is legitimate. But there's one thing that we definitely know, is that anyone that says cheat meals, anyone that encourages this type of eating structure where it's a meal plan during the week and then cheat meals at the weekend, is living 10 years behind and structuring your relationship with food. And it doesn't help you maintain fat loss too. Most diets fail. And one of the reasons most diets fail is because we are very rigid with our food choices. And then as soon as the diet finishes, we see that pizza for the first time in 8 weeks, and we then just can't stop thinking about it and want more and more and more of it, and regain the weight within a few weeks of what we've lost. Yeah. So it's not even a kind of relationship with food thing. It's important. That's the number one. But secondary to that is, if you want to maintain any fat loss that you've gone on, if you're on a fat loss journey, this is still really important, because you might think it's easier to lose fat by cutting these things out, but it's a hell of a lot harder to maintain that fat loss if you have cut them out.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's it's that notion of, again, when you speak to your clients, I'm fairly sure you have a similar attitude to myself, which is, say you throw yourself at, it's January or you're coming up to your summer vacation, you go onto a 30-day or 60-day program, it becomes an overly harsh exercise regime, an overly restrictive diet, because all you've got in your head is, I must follow this bland, generic thrash for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And I would say, right, what are you doing on day 32? How about day 35? Oh, I haven't thought of that. I guess I'll go back to how I used to eat. But we've not learned anything, and it's something that I think needs to be a bigger part of the fitness industry, certainly when it comes to a conversation with the normal people, as it were, the customers. Right? You need to learn how to live.
Yeah.
Don't go into the extreme. If you're going into competition for a physique thing or a photo shoot because you want to do that, then you can get a little bit more hardcore, but there's an end date in sight. You're going to go in the excess of your training. You're going to get more restricted in your food. I've got a question for you in a moment that wasn't on my original list. It came up because you mentioned competing. But yeah, it's got to be a case of, right, here's how I need to live for the next 25 years. I want to eat 2 or 3 times a day. Get that right in your head first to start with the basics. Don't go, oh, this person says they live on 1,200 calories a day. I'll do that. Why? It doesn't relate to you.
Yeah. And the thing is that you might have this fundamental dietary pattern that you follow for the next 25 years. Within that, you might say, for a couple of weeks or a couple of months there, I'm going to drop my calories a little bit. But the dietary pattern stays the same, but maybe you drop your calories for a little bit because you want to lose body fat for, I don't know, your wedding or something cliche like that. But it's still the dietary pattern and the habits all stay the same. It's just that at that point, your calories will fluctuate. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head of, like, this is your one life. This is the one day, this is the one chance you get to live today. Do you want to live it binging? Do you want to live it really hungry and preoccupied by food and not seeing your friends for that drink because you don't want to go over your calories? Or do you want to say, do you know what, I can have a couple of 100 calories extra today because I get to see my friends and make these memories, because life is too short? And it's something I've definitely realised in the last couple of years for various reasons. I'm 35, but I very much think this is the only time, like, I'm going to be in my 40s in 5 years, and then things will change again. And life is too short to waste it on having a bad relationship with food and exercise.
I absolutely agree. A few episodes ago, I spoke to Dr. James Moran in the UK, who's a performance nutritionist, who for most of his career has worked with rugby teams, both at the academy and first team level. He's worked with the England men's football team, or soccer if you're American, Formula One, and everything else. And we talked about this topic, and he was saying, I can't tell a bunch of adolescent to adult men, you have to have no fun, because that's not going to work. But also, they want to have a life. So he says, right, you can still go to the bar with your friends during the week. You can go to the pub after the game, but they build that into their nutritional strategy. But also, it becomes what's relevant. When your friends are having 2 or 3 pints a night, say that's 300 calories for the sake of a conversation, have a bottle of beer instead. That's a third of the amount. So maybe you're on 120 calories a drink. You come home 3 drinks down, and you've only had the same amount of calories that they had in 1 drink. Just things like that. Find what's relevant. I had a client here, just as COVID started to taper off, a lady in her 60s who's the cliched stereotype of a retiree in mid-60s, husband works, the kids are off in their 20s, she can kick back and enjoy a happy life. And she was like, I've got a back issue, I need to get in shape. COVID, I was sat on my ass, but I tell you right now, I'm not giving up the wine. Absolutely not. And I was like, okay, fine, you don't have to. And she was savage. I thought you were going to tell me no boost. No, not at all. All we've got to do is find out what's relevant to your total calorie intake that suits you for the week, and go, right, okay, if you want to have a few drinks with the girls sat in the back garden on a Saturday, you're going to come down to maybe 1 glass a night if you have a drink during the night, during the course of the week. You're not going to have half a bottle to a bottle every night. And she was like, oh, that's easy, I can do that. And it was as simple as that. It was relative to her. It was, oh, you mean I can't get pissed every night? No. That was it. But that was all it took. It was just relevant to her. She went, oh, I can do that. Yeah, I'll get it back to 1 drink a night. And it was just something as simple as that tweak. She was expecting to come to me after recommendation and go, oh, he's going to say I've got to live on chicken and I can't eat cake. No, God, no, I wouldn't live like that.
Same.
Yeah, exactly. Life, like you said, it's meant to be enjoyed.
Absolutely that. And I think recognising that it's all a choice. You have a choice to do this. When you choose, say, for example, this lady is choosing to maybe drop some body fat or get in shape, whatever it is she's trying to do, make healthful choices. So she's choosing to have less wine. She doesn't have to have less wine, but she's choosing to do that because it's beneficial for her journey, and framing it that way is so important to say, you are so privileged and lucky to get to choose to exercise, to choose to maintain these habits, to choose to eat one slice of cake instead of 3 slices of cake. That's very empowering, and that's a privilege, and let's all be grateful that we can make those choices. You don't have to do anything. You get to do all these things, and framing it that way is so, I think, impactful.
Sure. So the question I was going to jump back to now, I was making a note down here so I don't forget it. When you mentioned that you were bodybuilding and training for physique and all that, and this has come to mind because I've spoken to multiple athletes for the purpose of this podcast. Several of them have been Olympians, and it was very, very revealing for me. There was a Paralympian, there was an able-bodied Olympian, there's a few other people I've spoken to, all of whom have said there is a background to eating disorders in high-performance sport. And I know that exists in the bodybuilding world, in male and female. Did you find, in retrospect, if you think back now, were you in that pattern as well, because you thought that was how you had to live?
Well, I had 100%, there's not a doubt in my mind. I had disordered eating habits from 16 years old. Not an eating disorder, but disordered habits. I didn't realise that, but I grew up with Kate Moss as my idol, who said, skinny feels fit. So for me, starving was normal. Like, I thought that was what you were supposed to do. And so I grew up with those types of dietary habits, and then competing has this magical way of masking them temporarily, and then post-show exacerbating them. So then you kind of go through the cycle again. So I did 4.5 years, 4 years. So I would have a good relationship with food, then I would compete, and then it would be horrible. And then I would do the same thing again. And every time I learned a lot. That's one of the reasons I do the work that I do. So by the end of it, I was actually pretty fine. But definitely in the beginning had that. But I mean, the research is there. We know that bodybuilding attracts people who have very similar tendencies to people with eating disorders, personality traits. So things like perfectionism, narcissism, a couple of other personality traits that have this crossover. And I remember reading a statistic once that said the prior rate of anorexia diagnoses in bodybuilding men versus women is 100 times greater than the general population. Sorry, not men versus women, men versus non-competitors. So and that was one statistic. There are numerous statistics that are similar to that. So it definitely, like, we know that it does attract people, and it's in some ways it's a kind of healthier control than an eating disorder, right? But it's still just a glorified pattern of disordered eating. However we want to frame it, that is what it is. And for some people that might be healthier than what they were doing before, but it's still not the healthiest thing that they could be doing. And it's there's quite a kind of cliche trend, especially for women who go through disordered eating habits, then fall into competing, then come out of competing with really bad habits, and then restore their relationship with food. That is the classic narrative in fitness. I mean, I did it myself, so I see it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been in that world personally, but I've got friends that have, and clients that have, and I know how, like you said, how destructive it can be with someone's relationship with food, because you see your entire relationship with how you eat relevant to your end product. It's like, no, I have to eat less, I have to train more, I have to do this. I had a friend here many years ago. She now lives in another country. She's a multi-title winning physique competitor back in the day. But we were talking about this once over lunch, and she said to me, you do get into horrific habits, and the consequences of your body for a woman are as bad as you can imagine, and the worst things you hear about are true. And she was like, in order to win, like in so many things, I knew I had to do more than the other girls. So when it came to training, I did more. When it came to the drugs, I did more. When it came to eating, I did less. And when it came to dehydration before a competition, the normal sort of pattern is, as you would know, you dehydrate maybe the day before. She's like, I stopped drinking 3 days before a competition. She's like, I walk downstairs in my house and be so dehydrated, I forget why I was there.
Oh my gosh.
But she was like, I knew I had to win because I'd won the last one. She goes, and that's what I was prepared to do. I mean, if you and I, again, are aware of how that kind of world works, and there are rules in place now, I don't know how long they've been there, where if you go to a competition and you're not physically capable of walking properly, they won't let you on the stage.
Yeah,
but it shouldn't have got to that point.
Well, absolutely. I can't believe you have to say you can't compete in the sport if you can't walk properly on the stage as an able-bodied athlete. I competed at a show once when a girl in my category passed out on stage. Mm-hmm. She had a fit on stage, and I was a bikini athlete. So technically, the kind of definition of what a bikini athlete was supposed to be was attainable beach body. I hate that term, but you know what I mean. Not overly muscular, not overly lean, and yet where I sit now with my body composition, I'm probably 15 kilos heavier than I was when I was on stage. This is where I comfortably sit lean, not 15 kilos lighter than that. And of course, it's a sport, but it's terrifying. And you're right, people, you get into the headspace. It's one of the reasons I quit, because I knew if I wanted to compete again, I would have to take drugs. I would have to do a lot more, because I was 10 years older than the girl who beat me at British finals, and I was livid, and I thought I was happy with my second. I never thought I would get there, but I knew that in order to beat the 21-year-old on stage next to me, that would be my next step, because I would have to do more, and I wasn't willing to do that. There are enough reasons, but that wasn't for me.
Like I say, it's weird, because you and I, behind the curtain, as it were, we see and we know the patterns that people get into. I mean, I know the patterns that a few of my male friends are in as personal trainers, who are looking at the bodybuilding world now because COVID screwed it. So they're like, what's the next competition I can enter, everything else? And just think, you've just had a good long period where you weren't eating and training like that, but most importantly, you weren't in that mindset, you weren't on the drugs. And it was interesting when I saw people start to come back into the gym. I'm not going to give everyone's name, obviously, but you started to see people who you look like your own little brother, because you've been off everything for a period of time, but you're actually healthier, and it's visible.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. And I think even some, big name bodybuilding coaches now are coming out and saying, if I could do things differently, I wouldn't take X or Y. And these are bodybuilding coaches that I know. An ex-partner of mine who was a bodybuilder when I was competing, and he would look up to very much, and look at how openly they spoke about drug use and things like that. And I think now, with these really respected bodybuilders coming around and saying, actually, in hindsight, I wouldn't do these things again, it's incredible, because 5 years ago we didn't have that. So there are more honest conversations around it now. But again, there are always going to be people who want to take drugs and don't care about their health, or don't care about the short-term health implications. And I had this discussion with another coach recently, because I never used to advise people not to compete. I was always honest about competing, but I thought, I've competed, I can't tell people not to do it. And then in the last couple of years, my stance has changed, and I'm very vocal about, I would recommend that you don't compete. And I had this conversation, and I said, for women, they lose their cycle most of the time, not always.
Yes.
And we put it down to this short-term deviation. Well, I can't get pregnant for the next 6 months, or I just don't have a period for the next 6 months. But your bone mineral density drop after 6 months can be equivalent to, I think there was one statistic that looked at this and said, after 6 months of not having a period, bone mineral density was equivalent to a 51-year-old woman.
Oh, wow.
Now this is not average, but this was one specific study, and I think it's a scary statistic. But if you've got a competitor who's not had a period for 6 months because she qualified for finals in June, and then finals was November, then what's happened to her bone mineral density? Doesn't matter if she restores her period and then gets pregnant a year later. That damage has been done, and there are certain things we can do to mitigate that. But these are not short-term deviations in health. These are short-term deviations that then impact long-term health that I certainly was not aware of before, and I don't think a lot of people like to accept.
Yes, I mean, and say the consequences affecting every younger generation of people. I mean, I like to watch Shredded Sports Science and other content creators on YouTube, and James, whose channel is Shredded Sports Science, always talks about the impact of bad information and misinformation and people taking things they don't really know about. And he's a big one for certainly banging on about younger people, even teenagers now, taking SARMs and X, Y, and Z and eating these ridiculous regimes of diet and everything else to have a physique that would have taken grown men in their 30s and 40s years to acquire. Because it's like, oh no, it's short term. I don't care that I'm taking an unproven drug that's not approved anywhere in the world. I just want to look like that now for social kudos.
And that's what it is. It's social currency, right?
Yeah. which, I mean, you're saying you're only in your 30s. I'm actually feel old. I turned 41 a few months ago. So moving on then, because we're getting onto the realm of body image. How much damage do you think social comparison and social media is doing for people's perceptions of themselves and their health and how they look at food? Because more so than ever, any point in history now, it's readily available as an opportunity to go, oh, someone's eating like this, but they look like that, or I don't eat this, and I feel bad because I eat more than they do. How much is that a factor in these circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge factor when you look to, especially Instagram and TikTok now, to kind of look at what the standard is for men or women of our age, or people in certain jobs, or other single women, or other women in relationships, whatever the case may be, other fitness people. And in the past, you know, when I was growing up, when you were growing up, we would compare as a teenager to our best mate, to the popular person in school. That was really the limit. Then we would maybe get onto some magazines when we were a teenager, and I don't really know the men's magazines, but the women's magazines were quite toxic in the sense of we were being told how to diet from the age of 14. So that wasn't great. But that's when the social comparison starts. Whereas nowadays, you've got kids who are 8 with phones on TikTok. And this is not a judgment, because I'm sure if I had a kid who was 8 right now, I'd probably have them on a phone on TikTok too. This is not a judgment, but they are exposed to this type of comparison basically from this time that they can talk and see and understand what they're doing. And it's really, really pervasive. Social comparison theory tells us that for a lot of people, upward social comparison, i.e. comparing to people who we think has something better than us or more than us, is generally demoralizing. For some people, it can be motivating. But when it comes to body image, we know, like the research is there, social media use is associated with increased disordered eating, reduced body image, and that's time spent on social media. And again, especially the lockdown, social media everyone was on their phones 3-4 times their usual amount of time through their day. But the evidence there, we know that comparison in body image and food impacts our relationship with the body. But what it's exacerbated by is things like people saying, this is what I eat in a day, and then they stick that post next to a picture of themselves in a bikini with abs. And so you look at that and you go, well, if she eats that, then that's probably what I should eat. Not remembering the fact that this person is, say, me, who has been through bodybuilding, done years and years of competing, dieting, building muscle, and now eats like this because this is what suits my lifestyle. But the reason my body is like this is because of the last 15 years plus genetics, plus socioeconomic factors and all of these things. But it's so much easier to look at someone and say, oh, that we want a quick fix, we want that kind of instant gratification, and we go, oh, well, they do that, so I must do that too. Or we've got influencers who are very lean, talking about cellulite and body fat rolls, and for anyone in a larger body, which is 95% of the population, they see these things and they compare and they say, well, if that's what cellulite looks like, what does mine look like? If that is what they think is supposed to be quote unquote bad. And it's very hard to escape this, especially with the way social media algorithms work. You know, I deliberately follow people who are people of colour, people in larger bodies. I try and keep a diverse social media feed, but if I go into my Explore page, it's still thin, white, able-bodied women, because I post fitness content, and so that's always what they propel. So it's very, very difficult to notice it. And I think the only thing you can do is try and do all these things, but also just take time off social media and have quite a clear rule with yourself where you're not just picking up your phone and scrolling all the time.
It is a subject matter that my friends, people that know me, know it bugs me to no end. The fact that what works in terms of generating an increased attention on your profile is so prolific to the fitness industry. It fosters this incredible disingenuous behavior and misrepresentation and disinformation, because when all said and done, everybody only ever posts what they want to be seen for. So when it comes to the fitness industry, the men and women involved, this case of like, we're expected to have the better body, the better physique. And then you end up with going, how can I manipulate my own image and what I post to look like something, knowing full well, like you said, the people that view it aren't going to live my lifestyle, have my background, my history, come from the same lifestyle I had as a kid and all those informed choices that I had. but I'm now going to sell this based on just what I look like right this second. And as you and I know, the guy and the girl who go, eat like this, I've done this, buy my 30-day program, buy my supplements. You don't look like that because you only eat this food. You only take that powder. You've had 15, 20 years of productive exercise. You know, you've had a natural advantage because your mum's this shape, your dad's that shape. It's a very, very different person that's going to view that and go, oh, I wish I could look like you. Like, guess what? You're not. You know, you may be a 5'3" woman living in Birmingham. You aren't going to look like the 6'4" Brazilian who's on the beach here in Dubai because you're not that person.
Yeah.
I mean, look at them and go, oh, that's a good choice. I like the idea of that sort of food stuff, but guess what? That's not my life. But that's not what generates the algorithm sort of like feed. So it's like, oh shit, yeah, if I want to look like that, I've got to live like that kind of person. And I know last year when the Facebook whistleblower lady came out, and she started talking about how Facebook actually conducts its business. Like they know full well what generates sales on ads and following and all that, even though they lie about it. Like she was like, no, we know what works. We know what's damaging and disruptive. And she was saying how things get fed towards younger girls rather than younger boys because it generates that kind of pattern of like, follow, like we all know about. And I think it was an interview she was talking to as well. They were talking about the difference between younger men and younger women. And they were saying that young boys, young men, if you put a bunch of guys together, either online or in person, they very, very quickly start to interact and collaborate, whether it's playing a sport, talking about stories, favorite actors, football players, whatever it is. You put girls together, it becomes very quickly a comparison-based model of conversation. And like you said, when you and I were at school, because we didn't have social media and smartphones, it was you were looking at your friends. And that's pretty much it. But now you've got younger girls, teenage girls going, what does my best friend look like? What do they wear? Who do they date? And then they start looking on their phones. What's she eating, wearing? Who am I being told I should look like? What my body should be at this age? Or it doesn't. I should feel bad. And the cycle continues.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. The differences in men and women, but they're younger, and how they interact is unsurprising. But it's interesting, and I think you're right. I think, you know, I hadn't seen a woman in a bikini other than my mom until I was, I don't know, 15. You probably hadn't seen a man in budgie smugglers till you were that age. Like you don't. But whereas now you go, you know, and you post on social media and say, oh, that's what women should look like in a bikini immediately at 8 years old. And then that's consistently what, as soon as their body starts to change and you go through puberty and whatever happens to your body happens, you think, I'm deviating further and further away from what this is supposed to be. Let me try and stop this from happening, this normal, healthful process from happening. And if you have disordered eating habits as a teenager, you're much more likely to have disordered eating habits as an adult and beyond, especially if you're not aware of them and managing them.
Yeah. It's, I say, we're at a unique time in human history where so many potentially damaging influences are so readily available. I mean, I don't yet have my own children, but there's so many friends of mine who have younger kids who have already gone down the road of, oh, you can forget the smartphone. You can have a basic, it makes phone calls and it texts, or you can have one that we control, because they do not want their young kids to have this constant feed of whatever, you know, they might get access to when the parents aren't around. Because as we all know, children will find a way around some kind of parental lock because they're always more savvy than their parents.
Yeah, for sure.
So, you know, there's a friend of mine in London is like, oh, his 10-year-old daughter's going, can I have a phone? No, under no circumstances. You can have a flip phone.
Oh, I love a flip phone.
And you can play Snake in the playground if you want. You are not having an iPhone. You are not having an Android, because I just don't want you having one. And of course, 10-year-old girl just like, why? But it's like, no, you'll realise why when you're older.
Yeah, it's tough. I can't imagine that conversation. Not yet.
No, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if we go into, because we've very nicely ended up at this point without any direct agenda on my part, one of your blog posts was, are fitness professionals doing more harm than good? Which we've sort of touched on already when it comes to the content they put out. Now, when you wrote that, what point were you coming from? What sort of side of that conversation?
I don't actually remember when I wrote that. I think it was last year. So I don't have a side in that conversation. My lens is, I used to put a lot of my body out there through competing, and It helped me build a following. It helped me attract the type of clients that I wanted to attract, to then help them with their relationships with food.
Right.
So I could see the positive in that. But more recently, I've always struggled. In the last couple of years, I've very much struggled with this internal debate of whenever I put my societally acceptable, relatively lean body on social media, I may well be triggering someone into comparison, into feeling less than, and into thinking the way that I do things is the reason that I look this way. And I never want to be the person that encourages those things. So I talk about those things a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But then I have on the kind of flip side of that myself, this internal struggle with, I am a raging feminist. And I also believe that as a woman with autonomy over her own body, I am allowed to do what I want with my body. And if that is showing up in a bikini on social media,
Mm-hmm.
I feel that I should be able to do that. But then again, on the flip side, that may well cause harm for people. And I think in the fitness industry, when we share ourselves, especially if we're in leaner bodies, and we use that alongside a message of relationships with food or fat loss or whatever message we're trying to send, I think it can be really problematic because it equates the two.
Mm-hmm.
But again, on the flip side of that, in order to help the people that we want to help, that's actually how we get engagement. That's actually how we attract these people.
Sure.
I know for a long time people with disordered eating habits came to me because they said, well, you understand, other people don't understand because you understand because you've been lean or because you're lean. And that's not the case. I'm no better than someone who's not in a leaner body, but people feel that there's an extra level of empathy there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a really tough line to toe. Sometimes you'll see my social media page and it'll be a lot more pictures of me and maybe with less clothes on. And then sometimes you'll see my social media page and there'll be spells of me just like barely in me or just my face. And I'll be going through a phase of thinking this is not helpful. And I flip back and forth. I still don't really know what the answer is to it particularly.
I've got a follow-on from that based on something you've also said, but I'm going to ask you a question coming from a point of my personal experience and a genuine curiosity. I absolutely respect what you just said there about, and I agree that you have a right to your own autonomy, which says, no, this is me. I can show what I choose to. It's my body. Now, whilst I can see that as a valid point, and I can see the validity in going, I don't want to cause anyone any upset as well. I can see the reason why you, as a genuinely decent person, would feel both those emotions. Is there not a point where we have to go as a massively punitive society? We go, right, everybody can do what they want with their own bodies. I am not responsible for what you feel when you view other people. So if you I can't say that as I've never worn a bikini, and I don't imagine I'd look attractive doing so, but if you put a picture of yourself up, and don't picture that, please, for God's sake, if you put yourself up on social media, like you've just been on vacation and working overseas and doing things, if you put a picture of yourself up and went, here's me doing X, Y, and Z, and you're in a swimsuit on the side of the beach, you aren't responsible for the people that might view that and go, but I don't look like that. I understand because you're empathetic that you might consider someone else's point of view, but isn't there a point where we need to go, you do need to buck the fuck up a little bit, because the professional athlete in their outfit in the Olympics is ripped and they're wearing Lycra. They're not struggling with the guy who's not very fit but in the stands cheering me on, doesn't feel bad because I'm in better shape than they do.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And actually, last year, December time, I put a picture up of myself in a bikini and I said, I'll no longer apologise for showing up in my body. I will no longer apologise for posting these images, etc., etc. And I actually got quite a lot of backlash from from a couple of medical professionals and a few other people who are more anti-diet, who said, but it's your responsibility. You can't hide behind this personal responsibility narrative as someone who supports people's body image and health. If you know you're doing harm, then you can't hide behind that personal responsibility narrative. And I disagreed with them because I thought, that's your opinion, that's okay.
Sure.
But I think what we also have is an issue with people who are maybe in the anti-diet realm, or people who are slightly outside of fitness, who see bodies like mine and who have been in bodies like mine, but done so from a place of disordered eating.
Right.
People struggle to see sometimes people with bodies like mine and say, no, she must have something wrong with her relationship with food because she maintains relatively weak.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go up and down, right? And so I think people struggle to see a body sometimes that is societally lean and think there's that, and understand, match the two together of good relationship with food, body like that. Because this is not me in a conceited way saying I have this idealized body. It, like I say, it fluctuates all the time, but I'm aware that genetically I have abs when I have fat on other parts of my body, etc. And so I think there's a problem with that too, where people can't see past their own lens sometimes and their own personal experience, and they see somebody like me and they say, she must be lying. She's like, that's not true. And I think that's a problem too, because I agree. I think there's such a level of, I hate that we're taking personal responsibility away from people. And I think that's, it's like we can never say, with obesity, say, there are lots of genetic factors that contribute to obesity. There are lots of socioeconomic factors that contribute. And for some people, losing weight is infinitely harder than for other people. We know this, right? But, and there's this backlash about, well, we can't, it's not a personal responsibility thing, it's a societal thing. And I think it's both. I don't know why we can't say it's a societal thing, and yes, this is much harder for you, you've got a lot more barriers, but empower yourself to say, well, is there anything that I can do? Are there any little swaps that I can do? Can I buy tuna instead of baked beans? Little things like that, where I think when we say there's no personal responsibility, it's disempowering. Yes. And I don't really like that, but I don't know what the answer is. I just think this is kind of an argument for so many things in our world at the moment.
Right now, and I absolutely agree with you. It's, to my mind, it is seeping into so many aspects of the modern world. It's how best to describe it, if I get the term right. It's almost a sense of social constructivism. It's the idea that in everything, when it comes to body image, gender, self-esteem, everything else, it's no, we're going to lower the bar on everything, so no one feels left out, no one feels upset. You look this way, the girl across the street looks like that, she feels like this, you're up here, and she can't get to you, doesn't want to look like you, so wants you dragged down to a point where she feels on par. The participation trophies in school sports days, the kid who wins should feel elated, and his peers should go, I tried my hardest, I couldn't beat you. And the parents and the teachers want those kids to go, I'm going to strive harder, or I'm going to accept the fact I'm not the fastest. But now the attitude is, no, we're going to pull that bar down. Everyone's a winner. We're going to destroy the idea of different abilities and sensibilities and personal drive. Like you said, it's that norming of everything, all attributes, and it comes into body image. As I keep bringing up my height in various conversations on my podcast, I'm 6'4" and broad-shouldered. I cannot change those two things. Now, I know whether I'm training really hard for rugby or triathlon or whatever else, and my physique fluctuates with training and food. I can look more lean, I can look stockier. And either way, because my height gives me a certain aesthetic, I rarely don't look in shape. It just differs as to what I would look like up my shirt. But I don't walk around feeling bad, because genetically I can't change that. If I was morbidly obese, I could question, is my lifestyle responsible for my physique? I can't get shorter. So there's an interesting, like I say, lack of real world association going on, and it's getting more and more prevalent. You see it in the news all the time. I pay attention to British media and other media, even though I live in the Middle East, because I'm curious. I also want to know next time I fly home, what the fuck am I planning again? I want to know what I can get away with saying before I get bashed on the head and taken away for a hate crime. But things like that. I mean, there is got to come a little bit of a point where we think about our parents' generations would, and our grandparents certainly would go, it's got nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
If you and I now decide you and I are going to write a book and put it out in the January push for health and fitness, and as a result, we're going to go on 8-month crazy fitness experience to see what we look like at Christmas. We only have ourselves to answer to. We would only be disingenuous if we put on the front cover, you should look like us. And if you don't, feel bad. That should be the message that goes out there.
But it's not.
But it's not. And like you said, because you and I have a degree of compassion, we are aware of that conversation. You know, we don't go out going, but you don't look like me. You should feel bad about yourself. Question why you look like that. Do you live a crap lifestyle? I mean, I don't talk about that to anybody because, for a start, I require repeat business. but yeah, we're in a strange position, aren't we, socially?
Very strange. And I it's strange as like you said, compassionate people, empathetic people, but also rational, scientific brain. Also, it's difficult. It's difficult, which is why I flip between all of these spaces at any given time.
Yeah, there are lots of things clashing, and I think I wonder what will be the influence that starts to straighten the ship, as it were. What will come along in the future? People actually go, yeah, you know what? I'm going to worry about my personal contentment rather than looking for external positivity. But I wonder what that will be. But we'll ponder that another time. Moving on then, because I normally try and keep these things around an hour, and we're fast approaching that point. You've progressed as your career's gone on, and you become, as we said, a prolific content creator with your speaking and public bits and pieces like that. And I saw the things you've been doing over the recent times. When you got into speaking and to where you're at now, what do you think the prevalence for men and women in the audience is compared to what it was when you started? Because we know the conversation's more common now about health and body image and being personally aware of stuff. Is it almost an even kind of mix, or is it very definitely one side or the other?
It's still not even. It's definitely not even.
Right.
Now, this is both a gender issue and a colour issue, in that most of these events, initially at least, most of these events were led by white men. Mm-hmm. And as women started to get into the conversation, they were still led by white men. The main stages were white men, but women could do the female fat loss stage. Women could do the female health stage in the back corner. Women did the women's stuff, and then men did the general stuff. And that was like that for a very long time. And then a couple of years ago, I did an event, and it was the first, I was on the main stage after a male speaker. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I thought, oh, actually, maybe we've got a little bit more balance here. Maybe we're coming through. There were still on that main stage no people of colour. Mm-hmm. And so that was just before the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, when the same event was running again, and I got invited to speak at that same event, and I looked at the list and I said, you've got no people of colour on this list. It was like 20 people, and I said, you've got 2 women on this list. You need to do better. Mm-hmm. And that event ended up actually not running, so they never had to do better. But it's something that we certainly struggle with. But I think it's not just the issue of men not actively trying to find women to speak, which is thinking they should be doing, mm-hmm. but also the problem of a lot of women not necessarily having the confidence to speak. And that's also something that myself and my business partner, Emma, who we run in IQs, we are trying to support, bring more women into the space to feel comfortable to do these events. And especially in the fitness industry, you know yourself, if you want to be popular in the fitness industry as a man, you shout loud, you're controversial, you swear, and you're funny, right? Then you get a big following and you're popular. If you want to get a big following and name for yourself as a woman, you get naked.
Yes.
Like that's ultimately what it has been for a long time. So then what do you do if you want to be a speaker? What do you do if you've got a PhD and you want to be a speaker? Do you still get naked? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that works when you then ask for PhD level prices, or you want to go and speak at an educational event. Mm-hmm. You've all seen my arse. So how does this work, right?
Merging of TED Talks and OnlyFans.
Exactly that, right? And I'm here for that. I'm quite happy to be that person now, but it's definitely difficult to make a name for yourself as an educated woman without being naked. But you can't. It's not a false dichotomy, right? You can have both.
Sure.
Or it's a false dichotomy. You can have both, but it's a lot more difficult. So there was certainly a long time where it was predominantly men, and myself and Emma, we run events. We just started them this year where they are for personal trainers again. And we made a point of looking through who we wanted to speak and saying, like, how many women do we have on this panel aside from us? How many people of colour do we have on this panel? Because we have been preaching this now for a couple of years. To any event that we go to, do you have these people on these speakers? And we can't then run events and not have that balance that we ask for. But it's difficult. It's difficult to find women who want to speak and who are confident in speaking, and it's quite challenging. But that's our job, to do that work, and it's the job of men, women, white people to bring everyone else up. But it's not that necessary. Like, I don't say bring it up in a condescending way. I just mean bring them up to speak in these things.
Yes,
But it's difficult. It's difficult. It's still like predominantly by white men. It's just we're moving in the right direction.
I mean, it's interesting to hear you say, as a woman, the idea of how do you try and get women to be confident without taking their clothes off. When, if you look at the fitness industry specifically, that is how you get ahead on social media. You know, I talked to a friend's daughter around just before COVID, out of going into the fitness industry, because she had two ideas. Sorry, my comment lenses moved again. She had two ideas in her head about what she wanted to pursue as a career. It was into the fitness industry or something else. I forget what it was. And her parents said, "Look, we've known you for ages. She knows you. Will you just have a chat?" So I did. And I said, "Okay, cool. You want to do this? Well, here's what I recommend as a career path, and then get the basics under your belt, and then you can look to grow your knowledge and everything else. What would be your sense of personal image?" And she was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Well, at the moment, you're an 18-year-old. You post on social media what you and your girlfriends are up to. You know, the normal family shit." I was like, "Right, okay. Look on social media right now for female personal trainers." I was like, "Are you going to be happy knowing that your brother and your father and your parents and your friends are going to be seeing your social media of you maybe in a thong on a beach doing squats with your ass facing the camera because it gets you 2,000 likes?" And she started to question very quickly what it would mean for her to push to be visible versus credible. And it really made her question what she wanted. And I said to her, "You shouldn't be in this position, but that's the reality of the situation. You know, I know that if I want to take drugs for 6 months and get crazy ripped and lean, my social media will jump like through the roof, because that's the physique I will then have. People go, oh, he must know what he's doing. Like. And it's the same for women, except like you said, it requires you to take your clothes off."
Yeah. And I would like to say that I am all for women in thongs squatting on the beach if that's what they want to do. For me, it makes no difference to their personality, no difference to their ability to critique. I'm all for it. It's not what I do, but I'm all for it. It's and you can't certainly make a name for yourself without doing those things. It's just a lot longer fight, and it's an uphill battle, but it's one that you can certainly do. And again, it's something that I try and encourage the people that I mentor and teach, is that you don't have to be that person. What I find really interesting is a lot of our coaches on EIQ nutrition move from fat loss coaches to more health coaching and look at disordered eating and things like that. And so one of the conversations we have is you have to stop putting quite so many aesthetic focused pictures and more information. They all find their engagement drops. They all find their inquiries drop when they make that switch. And that's not to say that that's going to stay that way. It will go back up again. But if you want to make that switch and you do reduce that type of content, then it does impact your engagement. And because we are also an image focused nation, we like images, and that's why reels are so important now, because people don't even want to sit and scroll through information on a carousel on social media. They want reels, they want personality, they want to see something. But it's a great challenge to figure out how do we make respect and education and credibility engaging. Well, that's a whole other conversation. I wish I could remember where I saw it. It was a very, very small survey. I read an article written by, it was a young lady in America, and she conducted a survey in it was a very large university gym, and it also served the general populace as well as the students. And she was just curious in terms of what the general public saw in the fitness industry. So she conducted the survey, and I think it was only like over the course of 60, 70 people. I say it wasn't an expansive thing. It wasn't for any kind of part of her degree. She did it as a curiosity, and interviewed male gym members, female gym members about
what you saw as criteria that you found positive or otherwise in the fitness industry that you encountered. It was in terms of like personality, appearance, all the kind of things. Were you affable or not? And she said she found it interesting that, to be honest, as far as the guys were concerned, male or female trainer, as long as you were well presented, affable, and seemed to know what you want about, you get a tick in the box, you're all good. And when it came to the ladies who went to the gym, yeah, affable, well presented, good personal hygiene, as in, like, you know, you're clearly looking after yourself, you're not like scruffy and a mess. But what she said in her article we found interesting was it was a turn off for women going into the gym if the staff were dressed like you'd expect to find on the social media. And she said that for the women going into the gym between like 20 and 55 or whatever, if the women working in the gym were in tracksuit pants and a polo shirt, you're all good. It's when the shorts started to get smaller and the top started to get more revealing, it put women off.
That's some internalized misogyny, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's isn't it? Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I've never heard that kind of attitude voiced in a broader public forum before. I know women have said that to me, but it's the idea of like it's an anonymous survey. What do you think about the staff you encounter in the gym? I don't like the women who show too much. Oh, okay, that's coming from... That's
sad, I think. It's interesting. It's very interesting, but I think that is sad. I think that is internalized misogyny of, well, if a woman dresses like this, she must be like she must be super confident. She must be more interested in herself. She must be a flirt. She, like, whatever it is, this connotation that we have of women who dress like this must be like this, and that's really toxic. And if you think about it on social media, if you have this woman squatting in the thong, she could be the smartest person ever.
Sure.
But our internalized narrative is, well, she dresses like that, so she must not be smart. So you can't win. You get the engagement, but you don't get the credibility that comes with it, even though you could be the most, you could have 5 PhDs, you could have tons of experience, and yet if you're doing that as a woman, you cannot be credible, and that's a real shame.
Yeah, that was. I thought it was an interesting point of view. That I'd never heard it voiced like that before. Right, okay, you. So we're nearly done. I'm just going to wind things back a bit to a point we touched on before, right near the start, when it comes to eating disorders and disordered eating. To anybody who's watched this or listened to this, who's a parent, who has a teen, preteen, or into those years, who suspects or is pretty adamant that their child is going into that realm, again, what would be your advice as the qualified professional? How do you think they'd be best to approach it?
It's tough. I think I'm not a parent, so I can't put myself into that situation. I think if you're ever unsure, there's a really good website called BEAT. It's beat.org.uk, BEAT, and they have fantastic advice for parents or for people going through this journey, whether it be disordered eating or eating disorders. And I would recommend parents especially go on to that, because I think they have downloadable resources. So does Mind UK, they have some good downloadable resources. Cool. And I think the best thing that you can do is encourage 2 things. One, the way that you treat yourself, your body, your relationship with food is such a model for how your children do this. And this is certainly not a blame situation of if your child is experiencing this, it's your fault. It's not. But there are certain things you can do for yourself where you don't call foods good and bad. You don't talk about dieting in front of your children. You don't body check all the time and measure yourself and weigh yourself every day in front of your children. And children are very perceptive. They don't just have to, it doesn't have to be blatant for them to pick it up. They might see that your partner always compliments on your body, and you get really happy about that. So they learn that actually body compliments are a really good thing. Or if your partner says something negative about your body, how that impacts you. So moving away from talking about your body, your partner's body, your child's body, other people's bodies, commenting on other people's looks in any way, let's try and move away from that. And I think the second thing is making sure that you create a space where you can have these conversations with your child, and so that they don't grow up thinking it's normal to always be dieting. So they don't grow up thinking that they can't talk to you about, maybe they feel embarrassed because they ate something. Like, if you feel ashamed for eating a biscuit, then they're going to feel ashamed for eating a biscuit. So it's about having these open conversations, I think, as best as possible, which I know is difficult if you've got a 13-year-old girl who doesn't want to say anything. But creating even these conversations with your partner where your children are around so that they can kind of get involved in them indirectly, I think is quite helpful. Cool.
Well, thanks for that website. And I'll be sure to put that on the information for the podcast as well, because I didn't know that website existed. So that'll be really useful. Thank you. So before I get you to do your plugs for some pieces then, given the topics we've touched on today, what would be any recommendations from you out there for sources of information other than your own, like websites or people to follow and listen to when it comes to disordered eating disorders, general health and awareness? Anyone you can think of as a good potential source of information?
Oh, great question.
Not put you on the spot, sorry.
I'm running through some people that I know. I think Sohi Fit on Instagram is great. She's one of my good friends actually, but she has a similar background to me. She's doing a PhD at the moment, and talks a lot about this kind of middle ground between diet and anti-diet and body image, and she does a lot of great content. So I would recommend that you follow her. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
Well, you can't think of anyone right now. Just message me later on. This is not going out until Friday, so I can always add it onto the podcast.
Let's do that. There'll be a podcast. I feel the pressure from the top of my head.
Yeah, so I'm catching you off guard there. All right, okay. So we'll wrap up here. I'm going to say goodbye to you probably when we stop recording, but thank you very much for your time. It's been fantastic to talk to you. And please, social media, Instagram, you name it, anything you'd like to plug, points of contact, please feel free.
Sure. Thanks for having me. My social media is Emilia Thompson PhD, where I'm most prevalent, and also EIQ_nutrition is the nutrition course that we run, and you can find out more information on websites emilia.fitness and eiqnutrition.com, and yeah, that's the best place to find me. And on my DMs, I answer all of my DMs. I make it well, for now I do anyway, and I make it a thing that I have to. So if you ever want to chat, then my DMs are also good.
Cool. Emilia, thank you very much. As I said, it's been a real privilege talking to you. I hope anyone that listens or watches this finds some valuable information from it, because that's been the point of every episode, certainly talking to yourself, because it's a really prevalent topic right now, and it's such an influence on mental health as well. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.